beats you over the head for the rest of your life with a big national security stick. And so that people learn to duck their head and not speak up, because bad idea now.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Citizens are advised to take the following steps.
Find us, armoroftruth.net.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel.
This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test.
Protesters have definitely been, yelling at them for, this whole time. I have just noticed that one of the gate entrances has just reopened. I'm trying to see if police are entering through this way here. So to your point of if, officers are going in multiple ways. So right now they're going through, the window here.
Yep. With guns drawn.
It's because, wow. Guns drawn, a shield up.
This is earlier tonight at Columbia.
It's interesting that we've been talking about and the mayor and governor and students have been talking about the National Guard being brought in as the last resort, but this, I don't think they were expecting this.
Well, and it almost looks as simply as this officer is trying to open the window. I mean, you would have thought that perhaps they would just smash through it, but or just looking to see who or what is on the other side.
Yeah, so that's earlier tonight at Columbia University. Welcome to the show, my friends. Armor of Truth Live, number 310. We're back live with you after a brief respite. We've reset the studio and things are fresh in here, so we might have some glitches, some echoes, some things to work out. Summer, say hello.
Hi, everybody.
There she is, folks. Yeah.
We're back. Woohoo!
Yeah, so our sound is giving us a little bit of trouble when I pull up the desktop audio, but you can see this is from Columbia tonight, where Columbia University, where the NYPD busted in and pretty much shut it down. So all that was really required was for the university presidents, chancellors, whoever's in charge, to say, okay, police come in and stop it. And at least in this case, that seems to be what happened. We also saw this happen earlier today in Florida. Where was that, Summer?
Well, there was Florida and also in UNC.
Yeah, the first clip is UNC. I'm going to try to let you hear a little bit of this if the audio works for us. Columbia University.
Yeah, fingers crossed the audio is working.
Yeah, because this is a
drum roll.
This is the leader of their protest.
It's definitely a very
It's also possible that this vehicle we're seeing and these guys on the window are just standing there in the event that they feel like someone's going to come try to burst out the window, escape, that kind of thing.
Organizer and one of the negotiators for Quad. Earlier today, President Shafiq sent out an email announcing the end of negotiations and declared explicitly that the university will not divest from Israel. In that same email, President Shafiq claimed that we had constructive dialogue regarding the student encampment and made insincere statements regarding the university's actions. The university's negotiations evidence an elementary understanding of the words boycott and divest, which have been at the heart movement and at the heart of our encampment. While the administration offered us a timeline for review of divestment proposals, they refused to give us any commitment that the ultimate decision would be binding. They offered us limited financial disclosure by giving only their direct holdings, yet not the indirect holdings which account for the vast majority of this university's endowment. They also threw bribes at students. Shafiq talks about early development childhood education programs for Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza.
Okay. So what you hear there, once again, is demands being made. There are demands being made here. And at least in New York, I don't believe they satisfied any of those demands. So what we want to talk to you about tonight is what you may not know about this type of event. So if you feel the instinct to follow one of the narratives, maybe you feel like Israel is evil. Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. Maybe you feel like that Israel must be supported come hell or high water. Maybe you feel the entire Gaza Strip ought to be bombed off the map. I would like to advise you, take a moment of quiet humility to reflect. Because this is not as simple as the good guys versus the bad guys. Here's the critical point. This is a deliberate action. It's meant to provoke you. You're supposed to feel provoked by this. They know it's offensive. That is intentional. This is professionally led activism. Saul Alinsky advised these very tactics in his neo-socialist sacred text, Rules for Radicals. Now, Saul Alinsky was known for his work as a community organizer and political activist, a Marxist agitation propaganda agent, really. The idea here is that the emphasis is that the response elicited is more important than the actual action itself, and that the success of a campaign or a movement or a protest depends not on the direct actions taken, but how these actions influence the behavior of everyone else. The people in the nation, the people watching, right? They want to influence the behavior, decisions, or perceptions of the intended target, whether it's a person, an institution, a system, or an entire religion. In boxing, this is called the rope-a-dope, right? We talked about this back on Easter when they had they sort of announced Trans Day of Remembrance for Easter Sunday. It had been on Easter Sunday for years, but they decided to make a special proclamation right now, and possibly Biden's last year in office. That's on purpose. In practical terms, this advice suggests that activists should focus on actions that are likely to provoke a reaction and then leverage that reaction for publicity because you want to galvanize public support. You want to expose contradictions or weaknesses in the target's position, their stance, or to force a change in policy or behavior. This is a tactical perspective. For example, when a target is described as hateful, and then in defense of the charge reacts with outrage, there you go, he's hateful, look at him. The reaction validates the action and ultimately leads to the desired change. So whenever outraged students show up on campus to defend the American flag, which is, seems like the right response. But in this case, you're falling into a trap. Summer, how does it work now? The issue is not the issue?
Yeah, the issue is not the issue. The issue is the revolution.
And what is it about revolutions?
They're engineered.
Where they come from, right?
Right.
They don't come from
They're planned.
They don't come from the ground up, right? Revolutions are top down. They're never grassroots. We'll come back to that in a minute. I caught you off guard. That was.
I was actually getting ready to make a post.
Thank you for
Yeah,
that.
grassroots revolutions do not exist. Only revolutions that are engineered by a professional organized group will ever come to pass. And that is from former KGB agent Yuri Bezmenov.
Speaking of Yuri Bezmenov, thank you for that segue. That is excellent. Let's go ahead and run you through these. These elements of how you can subvert a nation from the inside. Okay, 4 stages of subversion, and that's what you're seeing here. This is falls in the category of something known as active measures, which was what the Soviet Union called it when they did it. 4 stages of subversion: demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization. You've already seen the demoralization of the United States of America. God is out. Family is out. Tradition is out. We're in the probably the destabilization phase at this point. It's phase 2. So next, well, in the demoralization phase, which we've been working our way through, now these 4 stages play out in the macro and in the micro. They're always sort of repeating too. So demoralization affects ideas, institutions, and lifestyle. Specifically, subvert religion, first and foremost, okay? Next, you subvert ideas. Subvert public education. That's been done for sure. And subvert entertainment, right? That's Hollywood. You make sure that your people are planted in Hollywood and they're on message, right? When COVID came down, people didn't have to think about what to say. They were given the script. All right, okay. Level 3 of demoralization, it happens at the level of health, the body and the mind. So this is a total transformation. Level 2 is you subvert the institutions. Human life is reduced to real suffering, to hell, only when 2 ages, 2 cultures, perhaps religions overlap. There are times when a whole generation is caught in this way between 2 ages. This is Zbigniew Brzezinski's. This is the foreword, I believe, the preface to Zbigniew Brzezinski's book, Between 2 Ages. 2 modes of life with the consequence that it loses all power to understand itself and has no standard, no security, no simple acquiescence. So the nation stops understanding itself. That's really all I can, this is the only way I can describe what we see here when these folks are doing this. Let's see, when they're chanting, they put the Palestinian flag, they bring down the American flag and raise Palestinian flag. People united will never be defeated. Slogans, chants. Are you with me, folks? You have this young lady who is the representative, right? She's the organizer of this group. Well, that's probably not really. That's the face that the professional organizers put out front.
Right, and can I just add that in that situation, as far as I know, the last article update that we got is that, they took down the American flag and put up the Palestinian flag, and then authorities came in and put the flag back up, the American flag back up. They restored it, and in actuality, then they decided that they were going to just take the American flag down also.
Just take it down and fold it up to
find,
protect it.
Which I find, this is the psychological impact.
Yeah.
This is a designed method that they're using, I would say. Let's take down the flag altogether. We don't have a flag.
Yeah, no flag anymore. Exactly. That's a good point. I didn't think of it that way.
Like in that, they're taking over from the inside, in other words. This is sort of like a nod to maybe a pin on the board of success.
Definitely it works that way, doesn't it? So to make crowds act as one obedient group, they have to be united at the unconscious level. The masterminds of mass formation or crowd psychology know this very well, and they have perfected this art. For example, symbolism is one of the most powerful tools for achieving this end. I'll show you some symbolism. I'll take you back We'll take you back to 2020. Now remember, here's a concept called dialectical materialism. This is the movement that we're watching is founded in this principle. It's a philosophical basis of Marxism and communism, right? Matter and energy are truth. Class struggle drives all of human history. And so if you can control one or both sides of that struggle, you can engineer society. Thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, right? Alchemical propaganda, we could call it that as well, and we have. You see, it works like this with images. Let's give you a full screen there. Symbolism is one of the most powerful tools for achieving this end, to move crowds in a certain direction. Similar names, even more similar logos, as well as similar stories have appeared time and time again, almost like omens of something big that's about to happen. The fingerprints of those who run national, regional, and global operations can be found everywhere. All one needs to do is pay attention and not give in to the emotions when watching the news or reading mainstream reports on the conflict. Simple but effective tools like appealing to emotion, appealing to one's perceived tribe, depersonalizing some individuals, and building personas for others make the masses easier to manipulate in order to get their full cooperation for whatever intrigue or debauchery the organizers have in mind. So now this is why you have to be very careful when we watch the news and when we allow ourselves to be carried along by the emotional stories they present. You don't know a tenth of what you might think you know about what's going on the ground, halfway around the world, or even in our own nation. Instead of intelligence agencies getting involved directly, governments and media produce the feelings through stories, through media, through entertainment. Also, non-governmental organizations do the same work of narrative control under the guise of humanitarian relief or aid. George Soros has been quite eager to admit and explain his direct involvement in the color revolutions in Ukraine over the past decades. The same tactics that were used to run the 2014 Maidan revolution are being employed again now, and they are over and over. The most recent of these was having the actor Volodymyr Zelensky placed in the office of Ukraine's president. Today, Zelensky is on his way to becoming the Justin Trudeau of Europe. In other words, the activist martyr has grown into the president martyr. Now, the scary part is that he might become a martyr one day, and that would be sad. But they're not above it. The individuals and groups that foment and fund color revolutions have been doing this for a long time. They came in around the issue of propaganda. They studied how to create hot-button topics for the American people. And they've been successful in compelling the American people, especially young people, to support all manner of intrigue and debauchery all over the world. They were able to get the American people fired up about Central America back in the 1980s. In order to gain full force of the United States military, they are dedicated to achieving their goals. They still want to get rid of certain governments. Regime change in Syria, regime change in Iran, on and on. Regime change in places you've probably never heard of. They are very skilled at this game, and they've been applying these same strategies for decades. They have a lot of allies inside the news media and the government, which means they can do a lot to control the narrative of any story. In America today, we have convinced ourselves that we are above this kind of manipulation. Too smart for it. Too sophisticated. We're not like those rubes in South America or Central Europe, right? We do well to check that attitude because we're being propagandized right at this very moment to back a movement that ultimately plans to enslave us all in a benevolent despotism if it can. And they are currently winning the information side of this war. The leader of a country can now be demonized in such a specific way that it sells very well with the American people, so they don't have to argue about policy anymore. They simply run a marketing campaign to attack that leader, and it's perfect. And they never have to explain why they're running a certain operation, because the American people are either so scared or outraged or eager to join the movement. They just write a blank check and say, kill the villain immediately. They've become eminently skilled at picking out leaders, finding their ugly traits, and highlighting them for use toward their goals. When you follow the money behind these organizations that form narratives and push movements into the public's consciousness, you inevitably find names like George Soros. He's the popular one, right? But there are many others. In the transgender movement, who is it all? We've got Tim Gill. He's the one that funds...
Tim Gill, Martine Rothblatt.
Martine Rothblatt. We've got the Pritzkers in
Jennifer
Illinois.
Pritzker.
Jennifer. What is his name? I can't remember his name. He's the man. Now, it works in the other direction too. Sometimes a hero is created for the same reason the villain was created, to further their agenda. For the largest operations, sacred victims are needed. Martyrs. Heroes and victims that outrage the public. Martyrs that cause the world to unite behind a cause. Back in Lebanon in 2005, the murder of politician Rafik Hariri led to the Cedar Revolution. In Ukraine, 2004, Viktor Yushchenko was mysteriously poisoned before the Orange Revolution. And as it turns out, this was the candidate that was being supported by the Western elites. And his poisoning served to lift him to the position of a sacred victim, which many believe garnered the compassion of the Ukrainian people and led to his presidency. Sacred victims can be civilians. They can be the elderly. They can be children. In the infamous color revolutions, it is the deaths of so-called peaceful protesters that affected the right attitude of the public to achieve the desired end. Problem, reaction, solution. Trained agent provocateurs show up and set the protest off with violence, creating the perfect circumstances for a sacred victim. Victims like, do we all remember this? George Floyd, are vaulted to saintly status almost immediately. In January 2014 in Ukraine during the Maidan Revolution, Armenian-Ukrainian activist Sergei Nagoyan was a well-known, well-spoken, nonviolent, and even lovable protester. This is a perfect candidate for martyrdom for the cause. He read patriotic poems to the crowd, for the cameras, was happy to pose as the face of his cause, became famous for his cause, and unknowingly became the perfect opportunity for the moneyed elite to set off their movement with a timely martyr. Sergei was killed on January 22nd, 2014, and the case has never been settled. Not to this day. It's unknown. Even though the Maidan was saturated with thousands of phones and hundreds of surveillance cameras, nobody knows what happened to him. How did he die? Well, we know how he died. His body somehow arrived dead at the scene of the Maidan, as well as a well-timed sacred victim, a martyr. No witnesses, and his body was immediately moved from the scene of the crime. Sergei immediately became the face of the movement, just like this sacred victim.
Can I also mention that with George Floyd and I Can't Breathe, here is another, this sounds familiar, right? Because I'm going to say right here, in a statement on October 9th titled "Oppression Breeds Resistance," student groups at Columbia University quoted a gentleman that we're going to speak to you about a little later in the show. The quote is, "When we revolt, it's not for a particular culture. We revolt simply because, for many reasons, we can no longer breathe."
We can no longer breathe, right. Yeah.
To fight is the only solution. So this, you hear this, "I can't breathe" with George Floyd, and then this right here, "we can no longer breathe."
That comes from the Guardian article, right?
Correct.
Right. The conflict easily escalated to a violent uprising, which achieved the very goals that George Soros proudly declared in his now infamous CNN interview. All right. Now, let's shift gears just a bit. I've lost my way here. I've completely lost my graphic. Just a second here. I need to find this so we can see. I need you to see what I've got for you here. Alexander Noble. Let's see here.
By the way, the name was Jennifer Pritzker, but the name that was the original name was James Pritzker.
James, that's right. I was just in the wrong place. Here we go. There's a delicate balance between knowledge and wisdom, between facts and truth. Fools rush in where angels fear to tread is an old adage coined by Alexander Pope in 1711. Now, Pope deployed this maxim as a critique of literary criticism in the early 18th century, but its implications are self-evident and timeless. Humans are very inconsistent creatures, especially regarding awareness of our intellectual boundaries and our ability to discern the big picture. We like to think we know what's happening. We don't know very much. There is a paradox at work in the world today, and you can see it in this particular movement on the campuses right now. Many are proclaiming their truth, a matter of personal perspective and gut feeling. At the same time, virtues of prudence and humility are being asserted as prominently as ever. An obvious contradiction that could not be sustained except for the fact that the definitions of these terms have been obscured. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But true wisdom is understanding one's limits and recognizing when a predator might be nearby. Prudence understands actions and their consequences. These are virtues lacking in the fools that Pope is describing. This characteristic is manifested among the youth that we've just witnessed, who've been seduced by professional activists and agents of agitation propaganda. You might hear it called agitprop. The response of the American college students to the Israel-Hamas war is a cultural response motivated by radical left social engineering. It is not an honorable reaction to an injustice in the world. It is not rooted in any ethical standards or reverence for eternal principles. It is an emotional response. The basic conflict here is between the prudent behavior of the wise and the reckless actions of fools. These are contradictory approaches to life and decision making. But keep in mind, for them, for the other side, for those who would be our enemies, there is no neutral ground. Wisdom, likewise, is not neutral. Caution and humility, those are the corrective forces to counteract this recklessness and foolishness of cultural trends, like the reaction of the college students all over America this week. At a time when their attention should be focused on final exams, succeeding in their commitment to education, and therefore securing the stability of their lives, securing the stability of their own society, and protecting their own right to freedom and opportunity, which is the best way to help others in the world who are truly oppressed and suffering. But instead, their endless energy and boundaryless, unprincipled passions have been appropriated by professional activists. These kids are a means to an end. And for the Machiavellian activists, Any collateral damage justifies the end. But the end is not this event. The end is the greater revolution to come, the one after which they believe will give them power, or the reins of power. At some point, the lights go out, and there are no cameras to pose for. There's no one to hear you chanting. There are no more peers around. There are no more colleagues or co-conspirators to stand with. Who are you when no one else is looking? How happy are you? Has your choice to feed your desires and satisfy the urges of your heart really been good for you? Has it really been good for your nation? Has it really been good for those people you claim to care about halfway around the world? Do you really understand their plight? Is what you're doing benefiting them? At some point, like with the transgender movement, at some point the makeup comes off. And you're alone with yourself. Has it really been worth it? Or was it just the thrill of the moment? Whose moment was it really? Was it even your moment? These soft, disillusioned young adults, most of them too immature to realize that they're merely cannon fodder for a much bigger covert war, seduced by the excitement of the moment into a false sense of security, blindly coerced to adopt a militant self-certainty, convinced by a reckless overestimation of their own knowledge and power, make foolish, often self-destructive decisions that end up causing far more harm than good. Not only that, the movements that they join almost always fail to achieve the objective they thought they were fighting for. Doesn't matter. It's because the objective presented to them as the most important single movement of their lives is not the real issue. The issue is not the issue. The issue is
always the revolution.
And totalitarian ideology is a shell game of one radical uprising after another, where the issue you see before you is never the real issue. To repeat, now for I think the third time, revolutions are never grassroots. They're always top-down and controlled by those who hold real power. And so these college students have been weaponized by deception and then deployed by unseen forces for causes they don't understand. Sigmund Freud's concept of repression highlights how societal norms and cultural values shape the psyche. Freud argued that repression is crucial for societal functioning because it ensures adherence to social norms and contributes to peace. It's good for society when people conform. However, it is also true in Freud's theory anyway, that repressing certain urges can lead to psychological tension. And that results in neuroses and mental health issues. And this creates internal conflicts that influence behavior. This is Freud's theory of repression. Now keep that in mind. That is very important to remember. In the sense that societal standards or pressures can shape the behavior of individuals and entire populations, Sigmund Freud's framework for repression fits like a missing puzzle piece into Karl Marx's theory of dialectical materialism, the idea that social change comes about by conflict between the ruling class and the working class. Let's get the definition of dialectical materialism up here for you again while we think about this. So in short, if Freud's theory is true, then social engineering or controlling the masses to very specific desired results could be easily accomplished. The Frankfurt School was a group of German intellectuals formed in the 1920s who extended and modified Karl Marx's ideas on class struggle. Also the nature of capitalism and ideology. And they did this by incorporating insights from psychoanalysis, sociology, and philosophy. Now these men were philosophers and sociologists, but none of them were psychoanalysts. Nevertheless, they developed a body of thought known as critical theory. And critical theory examines culture, society, and politics through a Marxist lens, from a Marxist perspective, from this perspective of dialectical materialism. So the focus of the Frankfurt School was a form of social engineering that positioned capitalism as this ideological system of oppression, and those who prosper within it as the oppressors. A key figure in the Frankfurt School, Herbert Marcuse, was a sociologist, not a psychoanalyst, not a psychologist. He blended Freud's concept of repression with Marxian critical theory to conjure an egregore of false collective consciousness that convinces the target group that their shared intentions, emotions, and collective energy can change the world in their favor. Marcuse's wicked spell weaponizes the working class as a means of re-engineering society. And as with all spells, language is a significant ingredient. For example, Marcuse's Orwellian linguistic sorcery reframes tolerance as intolerance. But not just any intolerance. This is intolerance specifically towards traditional values. It's intolerance that ultimately undermines moral foundations and social cohesion. In other words, it breaks down society. In his work, Eros and Civilization from 1955, Marcuse argues that traditional values and norms necessarily serve the interests of the ruling class and limit freedom. That's false. That doesn't follow. That's just an opinion. And it's a deviant reinterpretation that leads to a paradoxical view of tolerance. In his 1965 essay, Repressive Tolerance, Marcuse argues that tolerance in modern society serves to maintain the status quo and keeps traditional values in place. That's the problem. Tradition cannot stand. And so Marcuse counters this with more linguistic spellcasting, advocating for something called liberating tolerance, which means actively opposing traditional values and structures that maintain peace and prosperity, particularly those aligned with Christian values. Therefore, intolerance towards traditional foundations of morality and prosperity are linguistically and actively attacked. In other words, it's a revolution. However, it's not the revolution the kids believe it to be. The reality is that this shift, currently being embraced by confused American college students countrywide, necessarily results in ethical ambiguity, spiritual decay, and the exacerbation of societal polarization, which, again, undermines the moral and ethical framework that has historically guided American society. And sadly, as we watch these protests, we're witnessing young Americans coerced by emotive spellcasting, dismantling their own society, the society that has protected and nourished their right to freedom, and they're calling for it to be replaced with a cultural fragmentation, a societal instability, and an intolerant society that will squash their voices first. It's the ultimate gaslight. But in the larger picture of American society, the reinterpretation or the inversion of reality, the inversion of tolerance, has far-reaching effects on intellectual discourse as well. In his 1965 essay, Repressive Tolerance, Marcuse advocates for the suppression of all viewpoints contrary to progressive ideologies, especially traditional and conservative perspectives. This results in a stifling of debate and critical thought. In other words, you're not allowed to criticize them. To counter repressive tolerance, as Marcuse calls it, he advocates for what he terms this liberating tolerance, right? The actively opposing of viewpoints and ideologies that reinforce the status quo. Once again, particularly against traditional and conservative values. Marcuse argues that only through this form of tolerance, which is intolerance, essentially he says that only through this form of manipulation can society achieve true liberation and progress as it seeks to dismantle existing power structures and ideologies. So this is the great contradiction of the progressive movement. It is not progressive, not in the sense that they advertise it. It is destructive and anti-human. It's a cultural shift that stigmatizes and suppresses dissenting views. And as you can tell over the past 4 years or so where it's all come to a head, it narrows acceptable discourse. It eliminates some from the public square. Any viewpoints that deviate from progressive ideologies are dismissed, censored, or labeled as dangerous. What was it, Summer, what was the term that the Gallagher girl, they said about her at Tavistock? They said her ideas were dangerous, right? What was it they were?
I don't remember, but I mean, for sure, it's as well.
We'll talk about that in our next show. We'll talk about the debunking of the trans movement, which has happened.
Yeah,
it has happened.
Yeah.
They told her that because she asked questions, because she challenged this very mindset, they said
that she was dangerous.
She was traumatizing.
And she was traumatizing others.
Yeah. So you see how this works, right? You're marginalized and you're labeled as dangerous if you challenge any part of this system. It's suppression that undermines the open exchange of ideas. And the open exchange of ideas, the freedom of speech in the public square, is a cornerstone of critical thought and intellectual progress and freedom. It causes echo chambers where individuals are only exposed to perspectives that align with their own. And any perspective they're presented that doesn't align with their own is deemed traumatic. This leads to ideological homogeneity, reinforcing a singular narrative, limiting opportunities for critical engagement. It stunts intellectual diversity, prevents a balanced examination of social issues, and it reduces opportunities for everyone. It's a binary view that fosters this us versus them mentality. They call it black and white thinking. It deepens social divides. And it impedes constructive dialogue between opposing viewpoints. So this is what you see coming from this movement. I'll show you some more clips in a moment. Maybe this is a good time to do that. We've got, let's let you hear this clip about what I just said. I meant to play this earlier, about where the money's coming from. This is Fox News, too.
There's a story this morning in the New York Post. It says George Soros is paying student radicals who are fueling nationwide explosion of Israel-hating protests. And in the piece, the Post writes this: all of these protests are being organized by branches of the Soros-funded Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP. And at some, students have clashed with police. We've been trying to
Well, you heard it there. I'm not going to be able to. For some reason, there's something in here that's picking up my. There's a mic open somewhere in here that's causing this.
Mm-hmm. Reverb.
Yeah, so we'll take care of that before the next show. But anyway, if you want to counter this kind of movement, you have to promote open, balanced dialogue. You can't you can't allow yourself to be overwhelmed. You can't allow yourself to be to jump on a side in their dialectic anyway. You got to promote balanced dialogue. You got to allow for the free exchange of ideas. Meaningful debate, critical thought has to be supported. Now, before we get on to some more of this, Summer's going to introduce us now to a guy called Franz Fanon, right? And this is his adaptation of totalitarian theories to decolonization. What you've heard, what you hear right now are likely phrases like what Summer quoted just a moment ago would be a phrase that would come from Franz Fanon. So we've got this. If you'll allow,
yes.
I'll just kind of give this
Sure.
trace the line from
Yes.
Freud.
The graph.
Yeah, from Freud's theory of repression up to the Frankfurt School, which is in the 50s, when they take Freud's theory of repression and integrate it with this,
They integrate it into psychiatry.
They integrate it with Marxian critical theory, and then it's applied, and then it kind of hangs around, and it's influencing academia, so it ends up influencing psychiatry. And then from there, now you've got communist ideas in with psychology, and then you've got Franz Fanon, who is a psychiatrist, psychoanalysis, and then his ideas. You take it from there.
Okay, so Franz Fanon was a Afro-Caribbean psychiatrist, political philosopher, and Marxist from the French colony of Martinique. He was influenced heavily by the Marxian version of Sigmund Freud, as we've outlined here, and actually also Adolf Hitler. He was a West Indian psychoanalyst and social philosopher known for his theory that some neuroses are socially generated, and for his writings on behalf of the national liberation of colonial peoples. So if you want to think about, okay, when was he living? He was living from 1925 to 1961. He died at the age of 36. It's said to have been from leukemia in Maryland. So what you need to understand about this person, about Fanon, is he greatly affects the current postmodern progressive mindset. He is a pivotal figure in post-colonial thought, offered a radical critique of European colonialism. So in his seminal works, Black Skin, White Masks, written in 1952, and The Wretched of the Earth, which was written in 1961, right before he passed away, Fanon explores the psychological, sociological, and cultural impacts of colonialization. Fanon's ideas on decolonization, particularly his treatment of white Europeans in the context of decolonization, parallels totalitarian theories, specifically those of Adolf Hitler. So we're going to unpack that as we go on. Fanon's view of colonialism and decolonization, that is, colonial oppression and psychological impact. So in his book, Black Skin, White Masks, Fanon argues that colonized individuals internalize a sense of inferiority due to European cultural dominance. Fanon argues that colonialism imposes a totalitarian system where colonizers exert control over the culture, identity, and agency of the colonized, reducing them to subservient roles. This view blatantly ignores the value of coherent, organized nations. The second point that he wanted to outline and prop up is violence as a means of decolonization. So this is something that he's widely known for, is his use of violence. So in The Wretched of the Earth book, Fanon argues that decolonization requires the violent overthrow of colonial structures. He posits that violence is necessary to dismantle the psychological and cultural grip of colonialism, reclaiming the identity and agency of the colonized. This perspective mirrors aspects of Hitler's totalitarian theories, which emphasize the need for radical action to reshape society in accordance with a specific ideological vision. Parallels to totalitarian theories would be Hitler's theories on racial hierarchy. So what he would say is, how we would frame that is that Hitler's totalitarian framework, as articulated in Mein Kampf 1925 and 26, posits a racial hierarchy with Aryans at the top and the other races, particularly Jews, at the bottom. This ideology justified the Nazi regime's policies of racial purity and extermination. Fanon's work works to adopt a similar dichotomy, though in reverse, positioning white Europeans as oppressors and colonized peoples as victims. Social engineering and identity politics. Hitler's totalitarian ideology sought to engineer a society that reflected his vision of racial purity, utilizing propaganda, censorship, and social control to achieve this goal. Fanon's works advocate for a form of social engineering in the context of decolonization, aiming to rebuild the identities and cultures of colonized people, free from European influence. So he wanted them to be free from European influence.
You're saying there, I just want to make sure that that it doesn't slip by people. He actually took on the theories of Adolf Hitler.
Correct.
And put those to work. I think they said it was like that he appreciated the way Hitler protected his borders. He appreciated the way Hitler dealt with a problematic oppressor people group, which is a strange way to describe the Jews. So he adopted the
strategies of Adolf Hitler
and applied them to white Europeans.
Correct.
Who he calls the colonizers.
Which could only be overthrown through violence.
Now, see, what's interesting about this, Summer, is that what we hear from everybody in the movement is, well, Donald Trump is fascist.
Right.
And all the people who vote, all the Republicans, you're all, if you challenge our movement, you're a fascist. If you're not down with the trans movement, you're a fascist. But in fact, it's
them that are the fascists.
And how is it that works again when you don't want to be called something?
Well, that's the classic move of the abuser. They want to say that you're doing the thing that they're actually doing.
Yeah, that's gaslighting. Right?
It's gaslighting.
So the thing in these movements, the thing you don't want to be called, you accuse the enemy or your target group of. Interesting. Yeah, continue.
Yeah, so how he would go about deconstructing existing power structures. So with Hitler's regime, he sought to dismantle existing political structures, replacing them with a totalitarian state that aligned with Nazi ideology. Fanon similarly advocates for the deconstruction of colonial power structures, arguing that decolonization requires the complete dismantling of European dominance to create a new social order. So, influence on decolonization discourse. So think about rejection of European cultural hegemony, all right? So Fanon's critique of colonialism has influenced decolonization discourse, encouraging a rejection of European cultural hegemony. This has led to movements aimed at reclaiming indigenous cultures, languages, and traditions free from Western influence, ignoring the value of European culture's contribution to civilized society. Likewise, in stark moral contradiction, this perspective rejects the idea of positive cultural integration, emphasizing the need for distinct identities and narratives. So, continued impact on social movements, additional facets, in other words. Fanon's writings have inspired numerous social movements, including anti-colonial struggles, civil rights movements, and contemporary discussions on identity politics. His work continues to shape discourse on decolonialization, it's a mouthful, and the legacy of colonialism. However, his radical stance has also led to polarizing views, not a surprise, particularly concerning the role of violence in societal change. So who was Franz Fanon, the freedom fighter Palestinian supporters love to quote? Franz Fanon is the anti-colonial idol being endlessly quoted by leftists tweeting about Black lives or Palestine. Since October 7th, 2023, when Hamas militants walked unimpeded into Israel and killed 1,200 Israelis, the French-Algerian psychiatrist who became a fighter in Algeria's revolution seems more popular than ever. Fanon has been regularly quoted, analyzed, and disputed in social media posts in an effort to explain the violence. A cascade of memes, screeds, and proclamations have sought to apply Fanon's controversial theories of violence and decolonization to the Hamas attacks. In a statement on October 9th, titled "Oppression Breeds Resistance," student groups at Columbia University quoted Fanon saying, quote, "When we revolt, it's not for a particular culture. We revolt simply because, for many reasons, we can no longer breathe." So, I can't breathe. And if you're wearing a mask all the time, you probably can't.
There's that too.
So
isn't that funny though that everyone in these protests are all masked up?
Yes.
Why?
Everybody is masked up in those.
Any real reason for that other than, maybe it's because of that. Maybe the professional
the teams that are
activists.
training them up,
Yeah.
that's like you have to do that in order to participate. So to fight is the only solution. That's what he says. To fight is the only solution. Fanon has been called by one biographer the tribune of the oppressed. Fanon advocates violence as a kind of therapy for the oppressed. He believed the colonized had no choice but to fight back. Their very existence was at stake. So in his book, Black Skin, White Mask, 1952, he described the pivotal moment on a train ride in Lyon, France, where a small white French boy was startled by his appearance.
And that was, I didn't write
interject.
it there. It was because he's a black man.
Correct.
And that's his story. It's because he was black, the young French boy was startled by his appearance, and then continued there.
Yeah. So Fanon thought that he had more in common with the French than with his ancestral African past. And there he learns from this small child that no, he is associated with things like cannibalism and danger and violence. So this is something that he wrote about himself and his experience.
Now that can happen. Now we're not saying that can definitely happen, but his response to it was.
His response after was to assert himself through violence.
Through violence, right? That would be the wrong.
And
response.
this is one of the sung heroes that the movement, the far radical left movement, is following. So Fanon began writing about the psychological effects of racism, particularly on black people living under French colonialism, which he theorized led to feelings of inferiority and self-hatred. Eventually, Fanon traveled to continue his psychiatry work in French Algeria on the eve of the revolution, which broke out in 1954, and ultimately he joined the National Liberation Front. He turned the hospital he turned it into a hideout for anti-French fighters, including National Liberation Front, FLN militants. France would exile him to Tunis in 1957, where he became a spokesperson for FLN. Fanon went on he viewed violence as a requirement for breaking the psychological chains of colonialism. The transformative process would lead to a post-colonial society based on universalist ideas of freedom and equality for all.
So one thing I'll jump in right here is that what you hear in Fanon is that there's a complete rejection or ignoring of any good characteristics or attributes of colonialism, because there are good attributes. It is order is a good thing, right? Not every place where a people have moved in and set up has gone poorly for the people that lived there first. It doesn't necessarily follow that that's always the case.
Right. So Fanon believed in the idea of creating what he calls a new man. He felt that human beings had made the world we live in and that they could also unmake it. So we've heard a lot of these progressive types and we've delved into their psychological worldviews, and this all sounds very much in tune, very much in alignment.
That sounds like theosophy too. I hear a lot of
the new man,
yeah,
and that we can remake the world, we can unmake the world that we've made. His most quoted work from The Wretched of the Earth, 1961, was that as he lay dying of leukemia in a Maryland hospital, the book would transform Fanon into a hero among left-wing and developing world revolutionaries. Fanon was someone who was sometimes at odds with himself. The left has used him to justify mass killings and destruction. The most extreme voices have been amplified by social media. A cult of force has taken over the left and short-circuited any empathy for Israeli civilians. The left has hyped up on theories of liberation and singing hashtags and slinging hashtags all over social media based on memes of Fanon's quotes. So in summary, really what we're talking about here is he is one of their champions. He's one of their influencers. As they've gone through college and university, they've been schooled up on him. They've touted him in a very positive light, as if he's someone to champion. And he was influenced by the Marxian version of Sigmund Freud's work, and as we've said, Adolf Hitler. And I just want to say that when you think of the people that are actually participating in this uprising right now across the nation, you're going to look at the demographics, and you're going to see that the main participants is Gen Z. Gen Z is people, it would be 1997 to 2012, so they're from like 12 to 27 years old. So this is largely in this demographic. And then you're also dealing with Generation Y, millennial. But the bulk is going to be Gen Z. And just think about that, guys, because we know that these occultists, how they love to do things with meaning. And Gen Z is what? It's the end of the alphabet. It's the end of an era. It's the Great Reset. It's the dashing out of the old world. It's the conquering of the colonizers. And what do you have after Gen Z? But you have Alpha. Generation Alpha is the reset, the augmented humans in action, reproduction controlled. So, and again, we just want to bring up about George Soros and how we know that he's been funding the bulk of the protests that are going on around the country. So, and as well, one of the talking points that I've heard a lot as I've checked out the different news channels about this is they're saying, oh, it's 1968. It's 1968. Civil rights, Vietnam War, you know, and it's like, well, are they not orchestrating this?
You know, what stands out to me there, too, with what you point out about Generation Z and then comes Generation Alpha, you know, in totalitarian regimes, there's a theory known as year zero. When they take over, they wipe out all of the history. They try to remove everything that came before, and you start with year zero, day one.
Yeah, exactly. And what I was thinking is that, you know, back in 1968, when all of these, you know, it makes you think about how they orchestrate these events, you know, through world wars and through protests, and so it makes you think that, and one thing that we do have going for us right now, guys, is that because of technology, they can't really hide this stuff from a lot of us now. Like back then, they were controlling, you know, the radio waves. It was a lot harder for the common person to gain access into this information on how they conduct these operations. So praise God for that technology is going to be utilized up until the very last moment. That's also why they want so vastly to control their idea of misinformation, disinformation.
Yeah, good work with that. That's Franz Fanon. Now that is a character that you don't hear about very much unless you're in the movement or you're in academia today and you're getting beat over the head with critical theory and these ideas. But it's important to know who he is and who these players are, because his character, his work, the character of his work really does serve to explain what we're looking at today.
Right. And I just wanted to, I wanted to just drop it in because this is like around the same time period. You had the other character, George Brock Chisholm, coming on the scene in 1945, and he was the first Director General of the World Health Organization. And so he was also, what he did is he charged the field of psychiatry to eliminate the idea of good and evil. So this has been a long time coming, and our audience is very aware of that. I just wanted to drop that name about George Brock Chisholm into the dialogue here, because all of these characters have been laboring for a very long time on the theosophical side of things. It's the battle between theology and theosophy.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up, because that is a good point. James Lindsay brings this up, and it's important to reiterate that we're watching today. This isn't really Christianity versus secularism anymore. It is, but secularism is very religious. And so, as Summer just pointed out, this is a battle between gods. It's not really a battle between gods, right? But in a sense, it is.
The Antichrist spirit versus the Lord.
So how does James Lindsay say it? Theology versus theosophy?
Yeah.
Is basically, I would be a little more specific with that. But, well, in virtually every interview or conversation about the madness of this anti-human movement, somebody inevitably is going to ask, how did this happen? How did we get here? How do we explain today's woke totalitarians? To begin with, we must drill down into the underlying motivations. Why do they do what they do? What Summers just presented has explained a lot of why they do what they do, where the motivation comes from, the kind of thinking behind it that's promoting it and motivating it. But in doing so, in taking up this study, we can move closer to the solution. We can actually be conservatives. More importantly, we can stand firm as Christians against these obvious satanic advances. Roger Scruton, in his book, A Political Philosophy, Arguments for Conservatism, explains that totalitarian ideologies justify their grip on power by portraying themselves as the purveyors of justice, even as a solution to societal problems. Scruton says this. He says, quote, "Totalitarian government extends into every aspect of social life. Totalitarian ideology represents it as the reign of justice, maybe even as the final solution to a social problem that can be solved in no other way." So the Marxist viewpoint plays a key role in totalitarian ideology. Marxism's dialectical materialism proposes that societal change is driven by conflict between opposing classes, positioning the ruling class as oppressive and the working class as resentful. So the oppressed are necessarily resentful in this theory. So all human motivation then is reduced to a struggle for power, right? This is, again, in dialectical materialism, you see there that matter and energy are truth. That's what moves reality. So if you can control matter and energy, matter being people, energy being what they do, you can create your own truth. Marxism also underpins movements such as the transgender movement, which we're going to talk more about this week. Hopefully we can be back with you tomorrow. We kind of like for this show to sit for a day or two and then come back to you, but we really need to bring you more content here if we can shorten it up a little bit. But we want to talk to you about transgenderism. Specifically, is there anything on the tip of your tongue on your mind about what our study yesterday in the what's happened is a clinical pediatrician named Dr. Cass, right?
Yeah, the Cass report in the UK
has done a review of all of the transgender movement and all of its claims, and it has been utterly eviscerated and debunked. Now, this is in the UK, so anything that just as a preview for what we're going to be bringing up this week, because it's the arguments against it are now in reports, in studies. There's stats.
So there's pushback in the UK, and they're having success with the Cass report as far as the gender ideologies. There's been sufficient pushback as well. In Australia, there's a case called Tickle versus Giggle, where it's a all women's mobile app that's also a lesbian dating app, which, depending on what news source you watch, a lot of times they won't tell you that it was a lesbian dating app.
They leave that out.
They leave that part out. But what was at stake was that if they were to lose the case because there was a trans man that wanted to be involved in the app, and that basically the ruling was that biological females are in fact entitled to have safe spaces, and therefore he didn't have to get added into the app. So that was just a ruling that just came into
that's known as the What is a Woman case. Finally, a case in court that will have to deal with the question of what is a woman.
And it was significant too, because it would affect international law, women's rights on an international law level, like what happened. So for now, it looks like there's been a victory for biological women's rights, and so that's all very fine and well, and that's great. That's really, really great, and hopefully that will boost momentum for more people to feel empowered to continue to push back. But I just offer, personally, in my opinion, I'm not speaking for Brad, but I'm always looking at those situations like, because we do know that they've pumped in billions of dollars trying to rebrand the left and how they're coming across now. And so we see that, like, in cities across the nation, they're sort of stepping back and embracing more conservative values in cities across the nation, whereas particularly, it's been just like really radical with the homeless problem and this and that. So it's kind of like, they want to pull back and they want to seem reasonable because, they know that they need to bring in the election. They need to win the election. So they're going to try to pull back and not be so forceful.
Yeah, I think there's going to be in 2024 a backlash. It's going to be a big conservative backlash, but it'll be good for us for a little while, but I think ultimately it's going to be kind of ugly. We'll talk about that another time. But as we've pointed out here so far, this Marxism underpins the transgender movement, despite the lack of any logical coherence in transgender ideology.
Because the transgender movement has appropriated the civil rights movement, and they're using human rights and the civil rights, and so the sexual activists have taken over using the same tactics. So
yeah, we need to deal with bring back up the topic of the crisis of the two constitutions, Charles Kessler's book that talks about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, when the government clothed itself in immense unconstitutional power, and just give us enough power to end racism, and then we'll put that power back in the box. No, they didn't do that, and now that power sits there. It's the power of emergency orders, right? We've got articles like that on our Substack about the amount of emergency orders, executive orders, and emergencies that have been declared. But in the transgender movement, no logical coherence in it, but that doesn't matter. Public intellectuals and politicians still support it. But why? Why do they support movements that are clearly not coherent? Well, Marxism owes its remarkable power to survive every criticism to the fact that it is not a truth-directed, but a power-directed system of thought. It's not founded on the love of truth, it's founded on the desire for power. This highlights the power struggle at the heart of totalitarian ideologies. Such ideologies thrive by fostering resentment and unifying the resentful around a common cause. That's what you see right now in this movement on the campuses. Ultimately, this leads to the abolishment of institutions like law, property, and religion. Scruton says, quote, totalitarian systems arise when the resentful, having seized power, proceed to abolish the institutions that enable individuals to assert sovereignty over their own lives, unquote. So these ideologies create target groups, often seen as guilty of some collective moral offense. For example, the Jacobins targeted aristocrats, the Nazis targeted the Jews, and the Russian communists targeted the bourgeoisie and the kulaks. Scruton says, quote, one function of the ideology is to tell an elaborate story about the target group, showing it to be less than human, right? Accusing it of genocide, saying that their power, their prosperity is unjust, and that they're intrinsically worthy of being punished. Totalitarian ideologies, particularly Marxism, recruit resentment. That is really what you need to take away from this show. They're recruiting the resentment of these kids. And they do this. They recruit resentment because they intend to create a new ruling class that acts in the name of the people. That's the promise anyway. Scruton emphasizes that revolutions are often led by elites in pursuit of power. We've said this now, probably this is the 5th time. The elite derives its identity from repudiating the old order and then casts itself in this pastoral role, right, as the leader, as the teacher of the people, as the voice of reason. Scruton concludes that totalitarianism is a pathological form of a natural outlook emerging in those who feel entitled yet are unable to achieve their own goals on their own power. He says, quote, intellectuals, it seems, are particularly prone to this generalized resentment, even when they claim, like Friedrich Nietzsche, to be free of it. Here, then, is the perfect totalitarian ideology. A pseudoscience that justifies and recruits resentment, undermines and dismisses all rival claims to legitimacy, and endows the not quite successful with the proof of their superior intellectual power and their right to govern. The Marxian ideology provides the frustrated intellectual with the power that she needs, the power of her own resentment, which echoes and amplifies the resentment of a victim class. It's a well-known fact, once again, that revolutions are not conducted from below by the people, but from above, in the name of the people, by an aspiring elite. The French Revolution, for example, was the work of lawyers, professionals, and minor nobility who are impatient to enjoy political power in a society whose upper reaches were clogged up with functionless fat cats. The revolutionaries acted in the name of the people, announcing liberty, equality, and fraternity, and they consciously identified themselves as the enlightened class who had earned, through their superior understanding, through their enlightenment, the right to use the people for their own purposes. So their slogans and their doctrines did not merely legitimize their own resentment. They were calculated to conscript the resentment of others. So this movement has the same spirit. What you're seeing in the country right now, this is the same spirit. It legitimizes the resentments of an elite while recruiting the resentments of the students. Because they need these students to do the dirty work in pursuit of their goals. Their goals are access to the advantages that they covet. They want the levers of power. The elite derives its identity, again, from repudiating the old order, and then they cast themselves in this role as the mentor, the leader, the pastor, the pastoral role, the teacher. They are the priestly class, the ones who can confer authority. But they also identify a collective enemy, Right? In this movement, the collective enemy is, of course, it's Israel, or Israel and the United States. That's why they're taking down the American flag at University of North Carolina. So they identify a collective enemy, and in the destruction of this enemy, the people can cheerfully join in. It's okay, right? Because it's a moral cause. So the elite justifies its seizure of power by referring to its solidarity with those who have been unjustly excluded. They will still be excluded after all this is over, but then justly, since they will be excluded in the name of the people, and therefore in the name of themselves. So the lesson that we should draw from the totalitarian movements of the 20th century is that totalitarianism is not the natural form of a pathological outlook, but on the contrary, the pathological form of a natural one. I'll say that again. Totalitarianism is not the natural form of a pathological outlook, but the pathological form of a natural one. In normal people who cultivate the virtues of humility and live with their neighbors on good terms, cooperating, resentment is rare. And if it does occur, they learn from it and move forward. And then by the steady accumulation of social trust and collective knowledge that ensues when people live together by free association. But people who have an exaggerated sense of their own entitlements and very little capacity to deserve them, they're apt to define themselves in opposition to that ordinary and neighborly way of living with their fellow men. Their resentments are not concrete responses to momentary rebuffs, but accumulating rejections of the system in which they have failed to advance. Again, intellectuals are particularly prone to this thinking, this generalized resentment. So, what have we learned here tonight? Wisdom is more than an intellectual attribute. It's more than a mastery of the facts. Wisdom is a deeply practical relationship with truth, rooted in a fear and reverence of God, who is the personification of truth. A wise person is thoughtful and discerning. A wise person values long-term well-being over short-term satisfaction. Proverbs 14:16 says, "The wise are cautious and avoid danger, but fools plunge ahead with reckless confidence." The wisdom literature of the Bible refers to fools with at least 4 terms: scoffers, mockers, scorners, and fools. And they are those who not only lack caution, lack prudence, but deliberately reject reality and exchange wisdom, exchange the truth and guidance for the satisfaction of their own immediate impulses. They exchange the truth about God for an idol, for a lie. Hebrews 12:28 and 29 discusses serving God with reverence and awe because of who He is, because of His divine attributes. Angels, who are God's messengers and servants, fear to tread in God's presence without reverence. In contrast, fools rush into matters they don't understand, lacking reverence for the divine order. Philippians 2:3 instructs believers to do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. A mindset that is fundamentally opposed to foolhardy self-confidence, militant self-reliance. In fact, humility is an attribute of perfection. It is one of God's attributes. And it's something that fools disregard. We all face a fundamental choice. We face the choice of the path of wisdom, which leads to life, safety, and prosperity, or the path of folly, which leads inevitably to harm and destruction. Fools rush in where angels fear to tread. That is a timeless reminder of the value of cautious wisdom founded in eternal principles. And it's also a stark warning of this kind of recklessness. The recklessness of implicitly trusting cultural trends and movements that capitalize on human emotions and the desires of the heart. All right. So, anything you want to add here to wind this one up?
No way, man. That was good.
Yeah, I like the way that ended up. We hope you've enjoyed this one here tonight, folks. We hope it's useful for you now as you watch this story play out. You understand where it's coming from. You understand the foundation that's fueling it. You understand that it's founded on false notions. It's founded on fallacies, and that ultimately anything founded on fallacy is doomed to fail. But it is their resentment also that fuels them, which is very dangerous. So it's not as though they're not dangerous, because you can see the resentment and the anger manifested in these kids, not just in these kids, but certainly in these professional activists and agitation propaganda activists who are promoting all of this right now. And so we look forward to being back with you very soon. We're going to talk about this, finally, the official debunking of the transgender movement, and it'll be in the same context. Fools rush into matters they don't understand. They lack reverence for the divine order, for the purpose of humanity. You want to say goodbye to the folks?
Goodbye, folks.
All right, my
Thank
friends.
you, guys. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for joining us. God bless you. We'll see you next time.
See you next time. God bless you.
Well, that's a rather interesting position coming from a man on a crusade against the evils of technology.
I'm not against technology, Doctor. I'm against the men who deify it at the expense of human truth.
Armor of Truth. Live.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel and log on armoroftruth.net.